I wonder if Julian remembers the sound of that rain. It was 36 degrees outside, exactly the same as my age. The night he threw me and our 2 children out like bags of unwanted trash. He didn't just break my heart. He broke my world, thinking I would drown in the mud. Today, 25 years later, the sun is shining on my 61-year-old face as I sit in a chair that costs more than his entire life's work. The man who deleted me from his past just walked into my office, begging for a future he doesn't deserve. 25 years. It sounds like a lifetime, yet I can still feel the cold dampness of the sidewalk against my knees. I was 36, a woman who had spent a decade building a home, only to find the locks changed on a Tuesday afternoon. Julian didn't look me in the eye when he handed me that single suitcase. He was too busy looking at his phone, already living in a world where I didn't exist. "You're a small-town soul, Martha," he had sneered. "I've outgrown this life. I've outgrown you." With a 5-year-old son, Leo, clutching my coat and a 3-year-old Sarah crying in my arms, I watched his taillights vanish. He had frozen the bank accounts and redirected his salary. I had $0 and no place to go. The next 2 years were a descent into a nightmare. We lived in a shelter for months, sharing a room with 6 other broken families. I took every job no one else wanted. I scrubbed hospital floors at 4 a.m., the smell of bleach stinging my throat. I waitressed during the day, swallowing my tears every time a happy family sat at my table. At night, I folded laundry until my fingers were raw and bleeding. I remember the basement apartment we finally moved into. It had one window that looked out onto a brick wall. Every night I would lay between my children on a thin mattress, whispering to them that Mama has a plan. But the truth was, I only had a prayer. That prayer was answered when I was 38. A social worker found me a live-in position at the Sterling estate. Arthur Sterling was a man of immense power, but his mansion was a house of mirrors and shadows. His wife Eleanor was dying, a slow, painful decline that had turned her spirit into a jagged blade. She had fired every nurse in the city. When I entered her room, she threw a crystal glass at my feet. "Get out! I don't want another servant waiting for me to die." I didn't flinch. I picked up the shards of glass with my bare hands, ignoring the sting. "I'm not a servant, Eleanor," I said, my voice like cold iron. "I'm a survivor, and I'm not waiting for you to die. I'm waiting for you to start living the days you have left." For 3 years, I became her hands and her heart. I stayed awake through her night terrors and sang to her when the pain became unbearable. Arthur watched me from the doorway month after month. He saw a woman who couldn't be broken by gravity or grief. When Eleanor passed, I was 41. I was ready to return to my basement, but Arthur stopped me at the heavy oak doors. "The world has been cruel to you, Martha," he said, his voice thick with respect. "But you are the only person I've met who is stronger than the world. Stay. Let me teach you how to turn that strength into a kingdom." We married 6 months later. For 14 years, Arthur didn't just love me, he mentored me. He taught me how to read a man's greed like a map. He taught me that the best revenge isn't a scream, it's a signature. My transformation from a broken mother into a corporate predator is complete, and the man who started it all is finally in my sights. But Julian still doesn't know who I am. To witness the moment I begin dismantling his life, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and like the video. Now back to the story. 7 years ago, Arthur passed away, leaving me at the helm of Sterling Global. My children, Leo and Sarah, are now university graduates, working in our European offices, protected from the shadow of their biological father. I sat in my office today, staring at a merger proposal from a failing tech firm called Vertex Solutions. The CEO's name was Julian Vane. My pulse didn't quicken, my heart didn't flutter. I felt a deep, icy calm. I had been quietly buying up Vertex's debt for the past 18 months, waiting for the day Julian would be desperate enough to walk through my door. "Madam Chair, Mr. Vane is here," my assistant buzzed. I adjusted my lighting, keeping the head of my mahogany table in a soft, obscuring shadow. I wanted him to see the power before he saw the person. The door opened. Julian walked in, looking every bit the 65-year-old man who was losing his grip on the world. He looked at the luxury of the room with a hunger I recognized, the same hunger that had made him discard us 25 years ago. "Thank you for seeing me, Madam Chair," Julian began, his voice trying to sound confident but wavering at the edges. "Vertex is ready for a partnership that will define the next decade." I let him speak for 15 minutes. I watched him lie about his quarterly earnings. I watched him act as if he were my equal. "Partnerships require a clean history, Mr. Vane," I said, my voice low and disguised. "Tell me, what happened to the Vertex you started 20 years ago? The one that was built on the ruins of a family?" Julian paused, a look of confusion crossing his face. "I'm not sure what you mean. My personal life has never interfered with my business." I slowly rotated my chair, letting the sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows hit my face. I watched the blood drain from his cheeks. I watched his eyes scan my features, searching for the ghost of the 36-year-old woman he had left in the rain. "Is that so, Julian?" I said, leaning forward. "Because I remember a Tuesday afternoon 25 years ago when you thought a family was a liability. Tell me, how does it feel to be the liability now?" Julian's briefcase slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. "Martha?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a terror that had been 25 years in the making. Watching the man who destroyed your life tremble in front of you is a feeling no amount of money can buy. Julian looked at me as if I were a ghost risen from a grave he had dug himself. He expected to find a broken woman, a shadow of the Martha he had discarded. Instead, he found a woman who had used the bricks he threw at her to build a palace. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, with the weight of every tear I had shed while scrubbing hospital floors at 4 a.m. Julian's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at my silk suit, the diamond watch on my wrist, and the cold, unyielding authority in my eyes. The two men he had brought with him, his junior partners, looked back and forth between us, confused by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "Martha?" He finally managed to croak, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Is it really you? I heard you had struggled. I thought you had moved back to your parents' town. I didn't think—" "You didn't think I would survive, Julian," I finished for him, my voice as smooth as glass. "You didn't think the woman you left with $42 in her pocket and 2 hungry children would ever be in a position to decide whether you keep your company or lose your home. But then again, you were always poor at making long-term predictions." Julian tried to regain some of his composure. He straightened his tie, though his hands were still shaking. "Look, Martha, what happened back then? I was young. I was under pressure. We were both different people. But we're here for business now. Vertex is a great opportunity. For old time's sake, surely you can see the potential in this merger." I let out a soft, sharp laugh that made his partners flinch. "For old time's sake? You mean for the sake of the nights my children spent crying in a damp basement because their father had frozen our bank accounts? Or for the sake of the jobs I worked until my hands bled?" I stood up and walked slowly towards the long boardroom table. I picked up his proposal, the one he had spent months preparing. "Your revolutionary logistics AI, Julian," I said, flipping through the pages dismissively. "It's a disaster. I've had my technical team dissect it for weeks. It has security holes that would leak client data within 48 hours of going live. It's not an asset. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Julian's face went from pale to a sickly grey. "That's not true. We've tested it." "You tested it in a vacuum," I interrupted. "You were so desperate to find a buyer that you ignored the flaws. Just like you ignored the flaws in your own character 25 years ago. You're over-leveraged, Julian. You've taken out high-interest loans from private lenders to keep Vertex afloat, haven't you?" He sank into his chair, the mask of the successful CEO completely shattered. He looked small. For the first time, he realized that I wasn't just a potential partner. I was the predator who had been watching him from the shadows for years. "How do you know about the loans?" he whispered. "I didn't just know about them, Julian," I said, leaning over the table until I was inches from his face. "I bought them. Every single one of them. Sterling Global is now your primary creditor. You don't owe the banks anymore. You owe me." Julian looked as if he were about to have a heart attack. He realized that the merger he had hoped for was never going to happen. He had walked into a trap that I had been meticulously setting for the last 18 months. "What do you want, Martha?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why go through all this? Why bring me here just to tell me this?" "Because I wanted to see the look on your face," I replied, standing tall. "And because I wanted to offer you a deal, a very specific kind of deal." I signalled to my assistant, who walked in with a single-page document. It wasn't a business contract. It was a personal one. "Vertex is dead, Julian. By the end of this week, I will trigger the default on your loans and seize every asset you have left, including that penthouse you're so proud of. Unless—" I paused, watching him clutch at the table like a drowning man. "Unless what?" he gasped. "Unless you agree to my terms. But before we discuss that, I think it's time you met someone." I pressed a button on my desk. The double doors at the back of the boardroom opened, and a tall, sharp-suited man in his late 20s walked in. He had Julian's jawline, but Arthur's cold, calculated eyes. It was Leo. Julian stared at the young man, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "Leo, is that you?" Leo didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge the man as his father. He walked straight to my side and handed me a file. "The liquidation papers are ready, Mother. We just need your word." The look of pure agony on Julian's face was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in 25 years. Julian's eyes darted between me and Leo, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of warmth, or even a spark of anger. But he found only a wall of ice. Leo stood there like a statue of the man Julian should have been, successful, poised, and utterly indifferent to the man trembling in the chair. "Leo, son, you've grown so much," Julian stammered, half rising from his seat. "I always knew you'd achieve great things. You have my eyes, my drive." "You have no son in this room, Mr. Vane," Leo interrupted, his voice echoing with authority. "The man who raised me, the man who gave me his name and taught me how to lead, is buried in the Sterling family plot. You're just a failing debtor who's currently wasting the chairwoman's time." Julian collapsed back into his seat just as the boardroom doors swung open again. A woman burst in, her face a mask of frantic makeup and desperation. It was Clara, the woman who had been the upgrade 25 years ago. She didn't notice me at first. She ran straight to Julian. "Julian, the bank. They're at the house. They're saying the penthouse is being seized. Tell them it's a mistake," she shrieked. "It's not a mistake, Clara," I said, finally standing up and stepping into the full light. Clara froze. She remembered a woman in a faded apron, someone whose eyes were always downcast. Now she saw a woman in a $4,000 suit, holding their fate in her hands. "Martha? No, that's impossible. You were nothing." "I was exactly what Julian deserved," I replied, my voice dripping with cold venom. "And now I am the woman who owns your mortgage. I bought the debt on your jewellery and the lease on that car you drove here in. Every luxury you've enjoyed was built on the child support Julian stole from my children, and today I'm collecting interest." I turned my gaze back to Julian and slid a thick blue folder toward him. "I have proof that you embezzled $40,000 from my father's estate, forged my signature on the house deed, and committed perjury during our divorce. Sign over every single share of Vertex to me for exactly $1 and sign this public apology, or Leo here will call the district attorney." Julian looked at Clara, who was now sobbing, then at the son who loathed him. The glamorous life he had traded his soul for was dissolving into ash. With a shaky breath, he pressed the pen to the paper. His signature was jagged, a broken line representing a broken man. He slid the paper towards me, his head bowed. "It's done," he whispered. "You've taken everything." "Not everything, Julian," I said, handing the papers to Leo. "I haven't even started the audit into your offshore accounts yet. Now get out of my building. It's starting to rain outside, just the way you like it." Julian and Clara were halfway to the door, their shoulders slumped in defeat, when the boardroom doors opened one last time. A young woman walked in, her presence radiating a quiet but lethal confidence. She was 28 years old, dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back in a sleek, no-nonsense ponytail. Julian stopped in his tracks. He looked at her, then at the old photo of his own mother he used to keep in his wallet. The resemblance was haunting. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking with a desperate hope. Sarah didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of him. She didn't look at him with anger. She looked at him with the clinical curiosity of someone observing an insect. "I heard there was a liquidation in progress," Sarah said, her voice cool and melodic, yet sharp as a razor. She ignored his outstretched hand and turned to me. "Mother, did he sign it?" "Every last shred of it, Sarah," I replied, leaning back in my chair. Sarah finally turned her gaze to Julian. For a second, a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe greed, lit up in Julian's eyes. "Sarah, please, I know I wasn't there for you, but I want to make it up to you. I'm starting over, and maybe we can—" "Make it up to me," Sarah interrupted, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a small, tattered object. It was an old, grey teddy bear, its fur matted and one eye missing. "Do you remember this, Julian? I cried for 3 days because I left this in my bedroom the night you changed the locks. My mother found me a week later, crying in the corner of a shelter because I thought my toy was lonely. I was 3. I didn't even know your name. I just knew you were the man who took my bear away." She dropped the bear onto the mahogany table. "I don't want your apologies. I am the head of acquisitions for Sterling Global. I spent my morning authorizing the purchase of the very land your father's house sits on. By tomorrow, that house will be levelled to make room for a low-income housing project. I'm calling it the Eleanor Wing." Julian looked like he had been struck. His past wasn't just catching up to him, it was bulldozing over him. "You didn't just leave a wife," Sarah continued, stepping closer until she was towering over the broken man. "You left a legacy, and we took that legacy, polished it, and used it to buy the world you failed to conquer. You aren't our father. You're just a bad investment that we finally wrote off." Sarah turned her back on him, dismissing him more completely than any legal document ever could. "Security is waiting downstairs to escort you to the sidewalk, Mr. Vane. I'd hurry if I were you. The weather report says it's going to be a very long, cold night." Julian and Clara slunk out of the room, the sound of the heavy doors closing behind them, signalling the end of an era. I looked at my children, Leo and Sarah, standing together. The 36-year-old Martha who scrubbed floors finally felt her heart grow light. We didn't just survive, we won. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the rain wash the city clean. The debt was paid in full. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked shut, and with that sound, 25 years of noise in my head finally went silent. Julian was gone. The monster of my past had been reduced to a man who couldn't even afford a taxi home. Leo and Sarah stayed with me for a while, their presence a living testament to every meal I had skipped and every floor I had scrubbed. We didn't talk about business. We talked about the future. But once they left to handle the takeover details, the silence of the office felt different. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like a clean slate. I took off my expensive blazer, feeling the weight of the Sterling Empire lift from my shoulders for just a moment. I walked over to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one that stayed locked even from my most trusted assistants. Inside wasn't a diamond or a contract. It was a faded, wrinkled photograph of a 36-year-old woman holding 2 toddlers in a bus station. My hair was messy, my coat was torn, and my eyes were filled with a terror I can still taste if I try hard enough. I touched the face of that woman in the photo. "We made it," I whispered, my voice thick with a warmth I hadn't allowed myself in decades. "You can rest now. The kids are safe. The house is ours. And the man who made you feel like nothing is finally nothing." I walked to the balcony of my penthouse office. Below me, the city lights were twinkling like 1,000 promises kept. I looked down at my hands, once red and raw from bleach and cold water, now soft and adorned with gold. They were the same hands, just a different chapter. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my children. "Dinner at the old house tonight. Just the 3 of us. No business. Just family." As I looked out at the horizon, the rain finally stopped. A soft, pale moon climbed into the sky, casting a silver light over the city. I took a deep, steady breath, the kind of breath you can only take when you don't owe the world anything, and the world finally knows your name. I wasn't just Martha Sterling, the billionaire widow. I was Martha, and for the first time in 25 years, I was finally home.